Hello and welcome. The Leopard 1s are coming to Ukraine. The German government has given export licenses to export Leopard 1s to Ukraine. In this video, we are going to talk about the total number that is available, how many tanks can actually be delivered to Ukraine according to what we can find out right now, and what effect do they still have? How effective are they still? Because we shouldn't forget they are 60 years old, so they are probably older than the majority of you watching here. This we're gonna discuss in this video. Generally, it was more or less a question of time until the Leopard 1s were receiving permission to go to Ukraine as well. Right now, the information are Rheinmetall has 88 on stock. The Belgian arms dealer Freddy Versoys has 50. And FFG, that's the Flensburger Fahrzeugbaugesellschaft, has 99, at least according to media. In total, so we can talk about 230 more or less Leopard 1s within European arms dealers that are on stock. But we have to say that list is very likely not complete. There might still be other arms dealers because it was one of the most popular tanks in Europe and it was still used until recently by many nations. So the amount of tanks that has not been sold abroad and that has not been scrapped could still be well within the three digits. Still though, right now we know about those 230 and we have to say it's like the official data. That will likely not mean that every single one of those can be exported. Some of them might already have parts missing that were used, that was sold for spare parts or something. Then the FFG, for instance, is offering a whole line of systems based on the Leopard 1 that are engineering vehicles. If they've produced prototypes, then those prototypes were taken out of the Leopard 1s they had on storage. And obviously retrofitting them is very likely either not cost effective or not even possible anymore. Still, the number of potential tanks from the arms dealership might very well cross the 200, which could mean close to 2 armored brigades or maybe 7 to 8 mechanized brigades when it comes to equipping them. Also, apart from that, right now within European NATO, 2 more nations are still using the Leopard 1. That's Greece with roughly 500 and Turkey with roughly 400. I can't fully confirm the numbers to the last digit as those data are not always fully public, but it should be more or less in that ballpark. When it comes to those nations handing them over though, we should not expect too much. First of all, Turkey has held back with help. They allowed their drone maker Bayraktar to sell the Bayraktar TB3 to Ukraine, but they sold them, even though Bayraktar donated a few of them. That wasn't government business. The government handed over armored cars, basically APCs, but it's not a weapon system that is anywhere comparable with main battle tanks. So if Turkey or whether Turkey is actually willing to hand over MBTs is a whole different question. Greece might be more willing to do so, but we need to remember both nations have the Leopard 1 in their stock in active service for good reasons, because they believe they need that many tanks and they even still need the old ones. And at the same time, the production capacity within Europe is basically non-existent, close to non-existent. I just read that the Rheinmetall KMW are saying they might be able to reach 3 Leopard 2 a month next year. So if they hand over tanks now, they won't be replaced within the next 5 to 10 years, and that is something both governments need to consider. So it's possible that Greece might donate some, but we should not expect more than 1, maybe 2, at most probably 3 companies worth. So start one company roughly being 14 tanks. You can calculate yourself how much that is. It's not going to add up too much, but there might be more within arms dealers or more in storage somewhere else. Still, how good is that tank actually? Now this is a Leopard 2 A5 from the German Armed Forces, what we see here, and the firepower is based around the L7 A3. That's the tank here, a rifled 105mm gun, derived basically a version of the Royal Ordnance L7. Its firepower is absolutely not adequate frontally towards the most modern Russian tanks like the T-72B3, T-90 or T-80 BVM. In theory, if you hit some weak point, you might still penetrate. There's always some luck involved, but when it comes to general armor penetrating capability and general strength of armor, frontally, it's probably not that great of an idea to attack for it. Still, though, the fire control system is, according to General Egon Rams, basically equivalent in capability as with the early Leopard 2s, which should include the Leopard 2A4. So we see a tank that has a high, even though its penetration power is no longer dominating, it has a high chance of hitting. From the side, of course, it can hit and penetrate anything, even the most modern ones, and frontally it won't have to hide when it comes to T-62 or older T-72 models like the T-72AV or early B models. Also, the Leopard 2 A5 already has thermal imaging, which is far superior because most of the Russian tanks, especially the older ones, don't have it. There are even T-80 versions that never were built with thermal imaging, and that will allow the Leopard 2 to identify targets earlier, which will allow earlier engagement, and early engagement might usually mean a higher hit chance and then obviously a higher chance of killing the opponent before he can even fire back. Still, one of the strengths of the Leopard 1 is its mobility. It's close to the mobility of the Leopard 2. This means it's very agile. It can flank Russian tanks. It can get out of cover, shoot, and immediately reverse back because its reverse speed is also really high, especially in comparison to the Russian ones. If the Ukrainians use it wisely, they can basically peek over a hill, shoot, and immediately reverse, and the Russian side will have a really hard time even engaging them at all. This has to be done, though, because the armor itself is in existence, would be the best way to describe it. The tank was designed in a time where heat grenades were dominating the battlefield, especially heat FS, which allowed hits at long distances thanks to the fin stabilization and thanks to the high velocity of the shells. Heat meaning high explosive anti-tank, basically shaped charges. At that time, the armor was made with rolled homogeneous steel or cast iron or cast steel, neither of which can be made thick enough that it wouldn't be much easier to create a higher penetrating shell than it is to increase the armor. So the German designers basically said there is no way we can make the armor thick enough to withstand the heat shells we are going to face and we are going to face in the future, so let's not even try. They said we will make up for this with accurate firepower and with mobility, because if you can't be hit, then your armor doesn't matter anyways. So basically, its mobility was supposed to make up for its armor, and the armor is actually fairly weak. The thickness of the armor plates is only 70 millimeters. Obviously, it's angled, so the penetration range is somewhat higher. But just to illustrate it, 70 millimeters is less than actually the World War II German tanks Panther and Tigerhead, and even the Mark IV in its later versions had an 80 millimeter armor, so even those were thicker armored, even though obviously the armor in the Mark IV wasn't angled. Still, frontally, it's still useful to some degree. It will stop autocannons, at least mostly, let alone there is some lucky hits, and obviously high explosive shells can blind the tank, can damage sensors, etc., and basically create a mission kill. But from the front, they should be more or less able to withstand the autocannons from the BMP 2 and 3 and from the BTR 82. But when it comes to the side, even the autocannons can kill them. But that's not much different with other tanks as well. The Leopard 2, the T-80, everything like this can also be killed with autocannons from the side. We should expect the Ukrainians to install reactive armor, as we've seen them do with basically any other tank they were given. We see the Russians putting ERA anywhere they can now as well, which shows the high prevalence of heat charges and their high effectiveness, that both sides feel the need even to put contact 1 on various places. That is the earliest version and the weakest version of the ERA that is currently in use, explosive reactive armor. We will expect the Ukrainians to put them on the Leopard 1s, which should at least increase their chance of withstanding an RPG-7 hit or maybe an old ATGM. And as a lot of the tanks are actually shooting heat, because you need to understand that the majority of the engagement is not tank on tank. More than 90% of the fighting is not against other tanks, but it's against armored vehicles, against installations, against bunkers, against field fortifications. And against all of this, heat is fairly effective. So if a tank pops up, the first shot in his barrel will likely be a heat round. That shows us that the Ukrainians and the Russians are also really putting ERA everywhere they can now, because it's such a big threat. And if the Leopard 1 has received Contact 1 or even the better Ukrainian Nosht ERA, then it should be able to withstand a heat round from a Russian tank as well. Nevertheless, obviously, armor has to be seen that it's kind of like in existence, but the tank better shouldn't be hit. If anything serious like a modern ATGM is hitting it even from the front, if any of the modern AP-FSDS from the Russians are hitting it from the front, they will go through the tank like hot butter, like a hot knife through butter. But generally, you have to say the logistics will be easier for Ukraine, as the armored recovery vehicle and the Leopard that were delivered to Ukraine are basically using the same chassis. So maybe some idler wheels, some suspension parts, some track parts, etc., can be shared, which should make logistics somewhat easier. And we shouldn't discount them just for the fact that they have weak armor. Their firepower is not to be neglected, not to be ignored. It's at the very least, we should expect it to be the same strength as the Ukrainian T-64BV, not the BM Bulat, which is a far more modern vehicle and far more powerful, but the main tank in usage by the Ukrainians is the T-64BV. And when it comes to firepower, the Leopard 1 should be a fair match with that, should be equally should have the equal firepower to it, and we've seen the Ukrainians use their T-64BM fairly effectively. As its mobility is significantly higher than the other Russian tanks or Soviet tanks that Ukraine is using, the mobility will allow a more flexible use, be it for flanking, be it for delaying action, be it for using hills for shoot and scoot, more or less. That if the Ukrainians are using the tank wisely according to its strengths, they should take much use. They should be able to put it to good use. Again, thermal vision with good fire control should allow the chance for a first hit. So that somewhat makes armor less relevant, because if the Leopard 1 defeats and destroys its opponent first, then it won't face its fire. Modern AP-FSDS, as said, as well as modern ATGM will likely go through, but they go through anything else anyways. The amount of tanks that is actually immune to the most modern Russian shells and to the most modern Russian ATGMs are not really in existence. You can argue that the Leopard 2 A6 and onwards, probably on its cheeks, can both take a hit from a modern Russian ATGM and from a modern Russian AP-FSDS, but only on the cheek. In the hull, it will probably end with the destruction of the tank as well. The rest of the tank is still vulnerable. The Abrams will probably be not far different. So it doesn't really change that much. All tanks are more or less being destroyed if hit unluckily by the right weapon. The Leopard 2 is no difference there, and whether your armor in front of you is a meter thick and gets penetrated, or whether it's just 77 centimeters, doesn't make that much difference when it comes to you facing the shrapnel from it in the end. Still, it will be useful if the Ukrainians are using it properly, because we need to understand that it's equal, it can match up with the older Russian models. And it's obviously better for the Ukrainians to have Leopard 1 facing older Russian tanks than no tank at all. And even if the Ukrainians decide not to have it face the onslaught, the Russian onslaught itself, the fact that they are tanks and the fact that they are still usable as tanks might allow the Ukrainians to circle around some units. When we look at the long front line against Russia and Belarus, where there's not much active fighting going on right now, we see Ukrainian units guarding those borders. A lot of those units will have tanks as well, and they probably don't really need the tanks they have right now. So if the Ukrainians decide the Leopard 1 doesn't really fit their regular bill, they could replace those units with Leopard 1 units, as even a less powerful tank is still better than none when it comes to an area where fighting isn't really that expected. Then the less powerful one will do just as well. So in total, it is useful for Ukraine, but we need to understand that the majority of the tanks will probably not even arrive in 2023, as those tanks are 8 years, 10 years and longer in storage, have not been maintained, have to be rebuilt from the ground up, and the capacities to do that are limited very much as well in the West, unlike in Russia, which just built 3 tank factories just for that very mission. But once they arrive, they will be useful for Ukraine, but we have to say they are no game changer. They will be helpful for Ukraine like so much else is. They are useful, they shouldn't be discarded, but they are not the ones that will decide the war by itself. But I'm pretty sure Ukraine is happy to have received the news that they will receive them from now on. That's it from me for now. This channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. If you like the video, hit the like button, leave a comment for the algorithm, and if you haven't subscribed yet, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos, and recommend the channel to your friends and acquaintances to help it grow. That's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.